you wanted to create an online retail environment that wouldn't necessarily beat Amazon, I think, but you just wanted to take enough to support the independent bookstore community. Now, for those who might not know, this has been tried before in the US market. The American Booksellers Association, the trade association for bookstores in the US, they have a program called IndieBound that helps people purchase from independent stores, but it's a far cry from what Amazon does. I don't think anyone could really call it competitive. And then the big 5 publishers in the US, or maybe it was the big 6 at that time, they also tried to launch something called Bookish. It didn't survive. I think hardly anyone even remembers it now. So in any case, the road is littered with bodies. I thought it was pretty bold to announce this and to go up against Amazon in the market. Currently, I think they probably account for 50 to 60% of all book purchases, regardless of format. It's probably around 80% or more for ebooks. So Andy, the question I think we should start with is, why did you think you could do it? Even snatch just that crumb, given that so many other efforts had failed. And what do you think was going into it? What did you think would be essential to your success?
Yeah, I can't say I 100% thought I could do it, but I thought it was worth a shot. You know, the metaphor is like taking a shot at the Death Star. You have to take a shot at the Death Star because it's going to blow you up anyway, and you might as well like just take a shot. And so, you know, that made it was a challenge to raise money for it. The thing that galled me about Bookish is that they spent over $20 million on it. And Bookshop, I had to do it for, I raised $725,000. So it was like a real challenge to build a viable competitor to Amazon on a shoestring budget. But, you know, I thought that we had some ideas that made it possible, that would make it more successful. First of all, I wanted a concept of like of pure simplicity for the customer. And even with my team, that was sometimes hard to maintain. Like, don't you think we should force somebody to choose a bookstore before they buy a book? Is one example. It makes sense, right? The customer should choose a bookstore and then buy a book. But then you've created this complexity. And the problem is customers, like, they want a frustration-free, super simple experience. And if they get that on Amazon, and if Bookshop's more complicated, choosing a bookstore sounds simple, right? But then you have to be like, well, do they have a bookstore in their downtown? Maybe they've got 2 bookstores in their downtown. Maybe they like both bookstores. Then they're going to be thinking about, like, what bookstore should I choose? We want to make it optional for them to choose a bookstore, but if we force them to choose a bookstore, we've introduced a complexity, and we've introduced a point where they have to think and maybe have a struggle, which would leave them with a negative feeling instead of a positive feeling. So I just was like, this has to be delightful. It has to be a wonderful place to shop. You have to feel good about yourself when you do it. That'll make you come back. So we put the ticker of the amount raised for bookstores at the top, so that, and I was looking at the success of places like GoFundMe at the time. Like, people want to see what their contribution did. And so keeping it super simple, giving people a reward, making it a pleasant experience, that kind of thing was essential to the success of Bookshop, and none of the previous iterations had really had that. And the other thing was creating a social community feeling from the get-go, because one of our advantages over Amazon might not consider it an advantage, but I consider it an advantage, is that it's all human curated. There's, like, every recommendation on Bookshop is from a fan. Somebody who loves books, whether they're a bookseller or maybe they're a publisher or they're an author, but they're in it and they've dedicated their lives to it. And so you're getting a human curated selection, and that passion can show through. And when you're visiting there as a consumer, you get a sense of that passion. You get a sense of all these creative curated lists that an algorithm would never give you. So I wanted that also, that social feeling to be there. And this is all grounded in stuff that people in Silicon Valley understand. You know, we're kind of outside Silicon Valley and publishing, because the smart people that want to get rich don't get into publishing, they get into Silicon Valley startups. But we can learn from some of the things that they do. They understand how brains work. They understand that if you give somebody a sense of pleasure or delight, that hardens the neural pathways that led up to that decision. And so if you get somebody to buy once and you give them a sense of pleasure at the end, then they're more likely to do it again. Or social proof. Social proof is a big factor in any kind of Silicon Valley type startup that's successful. They want to have like, what is this thing? Why should I be on it? Why should I do anything with this? Well, the social proof is like, these are your friends that are on it, or these are the people you respect that are on it. So by foregrounding all the different literary organizations and publishers and bookstores that were on Bookshop, we created that social proof, which also went a long way. So it wasn't like, basically I tried to learn everything I could from Silicon Valley culture and then adapt it to something that ultimately is trying to undisrupt an industry. We're trying to keep the industry stable and keep it from being disrupted by e-commerce. So I just had these ideas. I knew that we also had something really powerful, and Ingram as a wholesaler has the same amount of inventory as Amazon. Like no individual bookstore could ever beat Amazon on inventory. And usually they can't beat them on turnaround time and shipping times either. But I knew Ingram could. Ingram has warehouses all over the place, and they can ship same day if the order comes in before noon. So I thought, well, we have a chance because we can have the same level of inventory and the same customer response time as Amazon. So customers can have the same positive experience that they would have if they bought a book on Amazon. They get it quickly, but you know, they can be feeling good about themselves and shopping according to their values and supporting independent bookstores at the same time.
Yeah, I think one of the genius parts of all of this is you being able to offer the virtuous alternative to people. Like you were able to identify and bring out what would motivate people to use Bookshop, that if it were easy enough or delightful enough, as you say, they would use it because they could feel better about their choice of retailer. Certainly in the book loving community and the publishing community in the US, there's not a whole lot of love for Amazon. And so being able to shop somewhere as conveniently and to be able to see your money support independent bookstores, like it was for a lot of people, they made the switch immediately, I think. I want to, let's see, I'm trying to decide. I know that you've felt urgency around having an alternative to Amazon because you've seen the numbers, of where books get sold in the US. And it kind of like the graph we just saw from Rudiger. I mean, the bricks and mortar sales, or at least independent bookstore sales, have been dwindling. And I remember you even wrote a recent blog post at Medium, I think, showing the urgency. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you think the situation is now, if it's just as urgent?
Yeah, I think it's more urgent. So when I started Bookshop, I had seen Amazon grow from 37% to 50% of the book market in 4 years. And that's an 8% rate of growth. And so I just opened up an Excel spreadsheet and said, well, okay, if they keep growing at this rate, how long until they're the only ones left? And the answer was 2025. 2025 is when they would be over 80% of book sales in the US if they just maintain their growth. They don't need to grow faster, but if they didn't grow any slower. And if Amazon reaches 80% of book sales, I don't think there's going to be that many bookstores left. And it was obvious to me that e-commerce was where it was all going, just like the stats that we just saw. There's a lot of statistics that show book sales in the US was around $18 billion industry just in 2010 in brick and mortar book sales. A lot of that's Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, some chains, college bookstores, but independent bookstores are a big part of that. And that number is now 9 billion. So that has been cut in half. And where does that 9 billion go in the past 10 years or 11 years? It's gone to Amazon, obviously. So at what point can the ecosystem sustain itself? And for somebody like me who loves books and dedicated my life to books, like what does that mean for the culture that I love if one retailer that does not care about books are just another widget for them, they have no love for those books, They don't care what's in them. They just care how many of them they sell. If that is the kind of force that controls books in the future that like my children are going to grow up in, that's bad. And hopefully everybody understands that. You know, the response to that essay was like, there were so many people who are like, oh, but I like Amazon, or oh, I'm a self-published author and I like Amazon. And it's like, what are you like, even if you're a self-published author and you like Amazon, if they control the entire book market, that's not going to be good for you. That's not going to be good for anybody. Like, you don't have to hate Amazon to know that having that much monopoly power over a cultural product that is as important as books is going to be bad. Now, Bookshop, you know, my goal is now no longer to snatch a crumb from the giant's mouth, because we've snatched that crumb. We have 1% of their sales, basically. So my goal now is to quadruple that and get it to, you know, a piece of the pie, basically. And I also want to look at ebooks and other places where Amazon makes money that the independent chains have shut out of, to see, is there a way that we can get them a piece of that pie too, and just keep growing independent, local, brick and mortar share of e-commerce, so that their share of the e-commerce for books is around their share of the physical book activity. And I want to stop the kind of scenario where people would shop from independent bookstores. They'd say, I love bookstores, I shop from independent bookstores when I can, but then they would buy books on Amazon. And sometimes in publishing, especially people in book selling, don't understand how many people there are that fall into that category. I know, because like I have soccer with my kids, and I know that so many of the parents there feel exactly that way. Like, they're just like, yeah, I buy books on Amazon. I try to shop on independent bookstores, but yes, I buy books on Amazon when I need a book quickly. I think for every person who's like a dedicated indie customer, there's at least 20, probably more people who would support independent bookstores if it was really just as easy as Amazon, and they changed their consumer habits. And everybody on this call, I'm sure, knows that changing somebody's consumer habits is like the hardest thing in the world, and getting that change to stick after they've even experimented is also really hard. So it's a little bit daunting, but I'm very happy to say that this year we're on track, even though the economy's open up, even though in May, bookstore sales in the US were up 130% year over year. They were almost at 2019 levels. How much did Bookshop drop when they all reopened? We dropped by 26%. So that means that most of our sales, that remaining 74% of sales, was additive, because stores were reopening. They were at the same levels that they were at 2019. And we had all this other revenue coming in through bookshop.org's e-commerce. So if that continues, and right now, the past 4 weeks are up 10% from the previous 4 weeks, and the previous 4 weeks we're up 12% from the earlier 4 weeks. So we're on track right now to make the same amount of revenue this year as we did in the full lockdown last year, which is a really strong signal that we're going to be here for good. And, you know, for me, the challenge right now is just, what's the smartest way for us to grow? How can we make an enduring difference? Because honestly, even though $60 million a year of book sales is way more than I thought we could ever get in our first year, it's still not enough. It's still not enough. Like, to really make a difference, I think we're going to have to reach at least $250 million, 250 million in sales a year. And the reason I think that that might be possible is because there's over 2,500 bookstores in the US. Compare that to Barnes & Noble. There's 1,400 Barnes & Noble locations. Barnes & Noble sells, probably the last time that they published their numbers, they were selling $330 million worth of books on their website. It's probably gone down. Let's say it's 250 million now. But if with 1,400 locations, they can sell $250 million worth of books online, then independent bookstores with almost twice the number of locations can do the same thing if we harness their unified market power and change consumer habits to do so.
So I'll butt in there with what I think will be my final question before I pass it over to Rudiger. I mean, Bookshop has its critics in the bookstore community, which you've had to respond to, because they think that you're in fact pulling away their sales. You're training people to go to Bookshop and not to them. Now, I mean, let's be clear. I mean, Bookshop's purpose is to support the independent bookstore. A cut of all your profits go to supporting independent bookstores. Can you, to this group in particular who may not be aware of the criticism, can you explain the concerns stores have and how you've been able to address it?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that, maybe I'm biased, but literally 81% of our profit margins last year went to supporting independent bookstores, and the rest of it went to supporting our platform and growing it. We have almost no fat. We also donated $250,000 to Bank's Survive to Thrive Fund, which was over 35% of our profit for the year after we paid out the bookstores. So we're not taking in money and keeping it for ourselves. But what they're afraid that we are taking their sales. But if you look at the statistics, the actual numbers, last year when we were successful, independent bookstores, e-commerce platforms were up 700%. So independent bookstores' own websites were up 700%, and we were selling $60 million worth of books. So where is the attrition? Like, where are we taking their customers? Now, to this year, in May and June, when sales were back up to 2019 levels, they were selling books on their websites, they were selling books in person, and we were still selling that many books. So there is no statistical numeric evidence that we are taking any of their customers. They're afraid we will, because they're afraid of this concept of an indie customer. There's an indie customer that doesn't want to shop on Amazon, that wants to shop at independent bookstores, and if they think that they shop at Bookshop, then they're going to be supporting the independent bookstores. But I think that it's extremely rare that somebody would change their habits if their favorite bookstore is Politics and Prose, and they've been shopping on Politics and Prose website for this long. Are they really going to switch? We have a ton of evidence that people are switching from Amazon and switching to Bookshop, and that is our goal. And in all of our messaging, we always say, if you have a local bookstore you love, shop directly with them. That is the best way to support them. So we're unequivocal in our messaging as well. But I don't blame them for having fears, but we just need to continue explaining what we're doing. And then I would say that if their strategy worked, and I don't think there are that many critics, it's just that they're loud. I think we have about 90% of support from independent bookstores, but when, if you're writing an article about us, you probably want to find the contrarian. But most independent bookstores really appreciate what we've done. But the ones that don't want us to exist, well, what about the past 10 years? What about the numbers I just explained? 18 billion to 9 billion, and that's before COVID. If the strategy of every independent bookstore for themselves have to build their own websites and try to compete with Amazon on their own, and that's the answer to Amazon taking over the market. If that was going to work, it would already work. Bookshop wouldn't be necessary. If that was working, if that's the solution, I mean, that's what people have been telling customers this entire time. I would love to have never had to build Bookshop. It's hard, it's stressful, but the reason that we're doing it is because that in itself does not work well enough. I still believe that it's great for independent bookstores to have their own websites, and they should get their loyal customers to shop on their own websites. But if it was enough to stave off Amazon, that would have already happened. It's not happening, so we need to do more. And a universal place that is top of mind, that authors, publications like Oprah.com, to Time Magazine, to Newsweek, that all used to link to Amazon, are now linking to Bookshop. It's truly necessary. And the critics, unfortunately, don't. I reach out to them every time I read somebody criticizing us in the press. I'm like, hey, you want to talk about Bookshop? And they never write me back, because I don't think they really want to engage with the issue. But I'm more than happy to engage with them. Now, I will say that there are some criticisms that we do want to address. And those are, number one, we make more money when we sell directly from our own stock. And number two, we don't want a third party in between us and our customers. And so those are two issues that we're planning on to iterate to solve. So full transparency with all the bookstores and their customers. We already have the ability for bookstores to see all their customer data and to email the customers on their own. Every customer has to opt out of bookseller marketing. So basically any customer that comes to us and supports a bookstore through Bookshop, that bookstore can market to them, send them emails all the time. But we want to add more layers. We want to give them transparency into their customer service tickets. If anybody has an issue with their orders, they can see them. We can give up-to-minute dashboards that give them business intelligence on what's succeeding, what's selling online, all that. So we're going to build all that out so that it's not going to feel like we're a third party in between them and their customers. It's going to feel like I have a Shopify store, and this is what my customers are doing on my Shopify store. People don't accuse Shopify of being a third party in between them and the customers. It's a service, a platform. So we're going to build it in that direction so that that concern disappears. And then the other concern, it's not impossible for people to sell their own stock. The stores that do want to sell their own stock could have their inventory in Bookshop. And if the book is in stock, it doesn't have to go to the wholesaler. It could come out of their stock. They could manage their own order queue if they want and decide to send books from their stock or have it fulfilled through the wholesaler. And that way they could earn a higher profit margin on the books that they have in stock that they're able to fulfill quickly. And so we can build that out too. And that'll also allow them to sell tote bags, merch, and other kinds of products. So we are planning on addressing those two substantive complaints. And because the great thing about Bookshop is that it's software. Like, you don't want to judge a new platform based on what does it look like when it launches in beta? What does it do when it launches in beta after the first year? It's about the potential of the platform. And we want Bookshop to be the ultimate best way to sell books online, period. That's the only way that we're going to really take 5% of Amazon's market share away in the long run. So we're going to keep iterating. And as we become more valuable to booksellers, and as we show how, first of all, we're free, so there's no cost, and they don't have to pay to maintain a website either. And every increase in conversion rate, every optimization we make in the platform, they all benefit from. Everything that we do will eventually show to the community and the stores, even the skeptics, that this is a good thing and that we're working in their interest. You know, we've also done, we've created an advisory board with 18 booksellers on it. Every new thing that we develop, every major strategic decision we make, we run past the advisory board. So we're getting feedback from the community all the time. That's another way that we prove that we're on their side, and hopefully get the skeptics to be more on our side too.
I really like the idea of Bookshop being like a Shopify for bookstores. I think that really well expresses what Bookshop does, and maybe reduces the feeling, the fear, the sense that bookstores some of them feel threatened. The one thing we haven't touched on, which I thought was, at least for someone who does a lot of online writing and blogging and has used Amazon affiliate links for, gosh, maybe 10 years, Bookshop brought out an affiliate program, which you mentioned all the publications that now link to Bookshop, like Oprah.com and Newsweek. I think the New York Times does as well. They're now using Bookshop affiliate links because you launched an affiliate program. And would you talk a little bit about the success of that?
Yeah, well, looking at how Amazon was so successful in the past 10 years, I think a lot of it was driven by their affiliate program. As an independent publisher, that was also, before Bookshop, I co-founded Electric Literature and I co-founded Literary Hub. And these are both really popular websites that write about books, and I'm really involved and aware of book coverage on the internet in general, because whether we like it or not, in the past decade, online conversation has replaced the cultural conversation that used to happen in newspapers and magazines. And online conversation is what drives book sales now. And that online conversation needs financial support. If a newspaper is going to pay a book reviewer, it needs to find financial support. BuzzFeed has a great book section with people who have real integrity choosing the books and writing about books, and they need to earn the revenue to pay those people somehow. they were paying them through Amazon affiliate links. So basically every place that you read about a book online from a mainstream publication, whether it's the New York Times or BuzzFeed or Oprah.com, up until very recently, they would always link to Amazon, and Amazon would pay 4.5% of any order that came from those links back to the publication. So as a result of all those publications needing revenue and Amazon offering this affiliate bounty for every customer they got, you have the entire internet, everybody that writes about books linking to Amazon. So you have a giant funnel as wide as the internet, sending every person who loves books to Amazon at all times. And that is obviously good for Amazon and obviously bad for books. It disintermediates everybody else in the ecosystem. Now, a lot of those book reporters, a lot of the people who are doing the author interviews that are linked to Amazon, actually are very sympathetic to independent bookstores. They're generally people who write, journalists, or people who grew up reading and loving books. So it's, fortunately for us, not that hard to convince them that they should switch their links. It might be hard for them to convince the business people in their organizations, but so we pay, instead of a 4.5% bounty, we pay a 10% affiliate fee to our affiliates, and we give a matching 10% to a profit pool, which is distributed among all of our independent booksellers. And that profit pool so far has distributed about $5 million in the past 18 months. So we are no longer disintermediating independent bookstores through this affiliate network the way that Amazon was. And we're also providing financial support to publications that cover books, which is really important for a healthy culture around books.
Excellent. So I'm going to pass things over to Rudiger because I know he has questions related to the expansion of Bookshop. Would you like to take the reins?
Yes, and I will do it together with Carlo. We are very, very interested if you also have an international strategy. Carlo, how would you phrase that question?
Well, Andy, you just started in Spain, or you're starting an operation in Spain. So first, I'd love to hear about your expectations going abroad. Probably, what are the challenges when going to other countries? And Michalis from Greece has just mentioned on the chat here that perhaps if you don't have a very strong distributor like England, like you have in the US, that might be a difficulty. So I'd like to know if that's the case and what are the other challenges. And by the way, Michalis made a Freudian slip on his comment. He actually wrote bookshop.gr as if it was in Greece already. So maybe Michalis. So Andy, let me know your plans for Greece, please.
Yeah, well, so we launched our first international expansion was in the UK, and that was extremely successful. It was profitable on the first day. We, like in the US with Ingram, in the UK, they have Gardners. And so they do have a very strong distributor who has great inventory and has almost every book available and can ship directly to customers' homes. So it is much easier to build out this model if you have a big wholesaler that has a full catalog and is able to ship directly to consumers' homes. Absolutely. In Spain, we didn't have that, so we've had to cobble together a bunch of relationships with publishers, other distributors, and we still don't have a complete catalog. And Spain is much more of a beta site than the UK. Also in Spain, they had another initiative that was similar to Bookshop that launched before us, which is Todos dos Libros. And I really respect the people at Todos dos Libros, and we don't want to step on their toes. So we're trying to be additive and constructive in that environment. But that is one of the challenges as well. Like, we spoke to a lot of people in Italy, because a lot of people in Italy want us to come, but there was a kind of a bookshop-ish initiative in Italy. And even in Germany, I did a bunch of presentations to different German organizations, and some of the people who came to those presentations have just launched yourbook.shop, which is like the German like version of Bookshop. And I have mixed feelings, because I would, like, on one hand, if they succeed, then I'm all for it. If they succeed in the mission of supporting independent bookstores, if any of these local initiatives succeed, then I 100% support them. But if they have trouble getting traction, then it also makes us have trouble getting traction, because we don't want to come into an environment, like we don't want to come where we're not wanted, and we don't want to come where we could seem like we're in competition with another bookseller initiative. We want to be allies with the booksellers, and we want to all have everyone feel like we're on the same side. So those are the two challenges, really. I mean, I guess there's three challenges: learning the regulations and learning the ins and outs of a new market is number one as a challenge. Like in the US and the UK, I can kind of understand what the media around books is, who are the influencers around books, what's the environment, like how do we do PR, how do we do marketing in those markets. And when we get to Spain or the EU, it's a little bit tougher for us to understand. The second challenge is wholesalers. Like if you have to cobble together many wholesalers, or if you have to do your own warehousing and shipping solution, it becomes much more complicated. And then the third problem is just making sure that you're not stepping on people's toes. You want to go in to places where you're wanted, and they feel like I want people to feel like, oh, Bookshop's a success. We can do it here. We can use our we're happy to use our technology and all of our lessons that we've learned. The versions of bookshops that happen in different countries can be independent companies that are incorporated in those countries. We don't need to, because I think that there's some trepidation about, oh, there's a US company that's coming in, an American company is coming in and kind of trying to take over our local bookstores. So we don't want it to feel like that. So we want it to be a local company that has a board of directors that is from that country, and or at least, and if it's the EU, from the EU. But that said, I think that all three of those hurdles are you can beat them. They're not impossible, and I hope that we will continue to expand. Spain is proving to be more challenging than the UK, although it's just been in beta. But we're going to really see how it does over the holiday season. But I think what the real key to making it work internationally is to have great partners who understand the markets in those countries and who also are respected in those countries, and so that they can get traction for the idea.